everybody, and welcome back to Megadepth. Thanks so much for checking out this video. In this episode, I'm gonna do something that I probably won't do too much of, and I'm gonna do a movie review, but don't worry, we're not going off topic here because this film is directly related to music. As you can see from the title of this video, I'm of course talking about the film Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, the reason why I wanted to do this review in the first place is, like I said before on this channel, I'm a huge fan of Queen. I'm a big fan in the sense that over the years I've read every article and book and watched every documentary about the band that I could get my hands on. So I'm a longtime fan, diehard fan, big fan, huge fan, whatever you want to call it, you get the picture. Ever since I was 10 years old, I felt a connection with this band. I've always loved the courage that all four of them showed when they needed to. I loved how they so cleverly ignored criticism about their music, especially in the early years, and just continued with their vision. And obviously I love all the songs that they wrote. I think Queen is one of those bands where there was not really any formula, you know what I mean? They kind of wrote whatever they were feeling at the time, and that kept things fresh and interesting in my view. But of course, Freddie's story in particular never ceases to amaze me because, you know, his life really was complicated. I think it is fair to say that. But he was always a fighter, and he lived life to the fullest, and he always managed to create, to write new songs and always be involved with art, whether it was music or something else. And even when he was diagnosed with a terrible illness, he still managed to spread joy to the people around him, and he still managed to create and write songs, and he basically carried on as normally as he would until he no longer could. And to me, that's an incredible amount of strength and courage, and just the fact that he was always full of life is hugely inspirational to me, and I think that a lot of people feel the same way. So I've been a fan for about 23 years and counting, and in that time frame I've seen some great books and documentaries, but I've also seen some not so great ones. Usually the great ones are either official releases directly from the band or from people who knew one or more members of the band. So you know, you have documentaries like Days of Our Lives, and then you have, you know, Peter Freestone's book about Freddie Mercury. So those are great resources, and if you haven't checked those out yet, I'd highly recommend that you do. But I've also seen some clumsy documentaries out there from people who did not really know the band, or who didn't really bother to reach out to the living members of the band, or the people who actually knew them. And, you know, stuff that's just full of lies and misinformation. If you go on YouTube, they're out there. I don't know why people do it, but they do it. So, at the end of the day, as a fan, Queen's legacy matters to me. Freddie's legacy in particular matters to me. When you know that there are people out there who are just so eager to spread any rumor that they wish, that kind of makes you a little bit nervous as a fan because you care so much. So it is with these feelings that I approached this new film, and it is with these feelings that I'm shooting this video. The film Bohemian Rhapsody was announced, I want to say first announced maybe 8 years ago, but I'm sure they were talking about it even before that. First it was dubbed the Freddie film, Freddie biopic, Queen biopic. It went through a lot of different sort of nicknames, and then we got the official title as Bohemian Rhapsody, obviously named after Queen's iconic 1975 song. Now, of course, the question everybody's asking is, what took them so long? And that's a long answer. And I'm not going to go into the details of all of that, but it is important to talk a little bit about what took them so long, because it'll help you understand the review a little bit better, and the film for that matter. Obviously, the Queen camp had to deal with a lot of different stakeholders throughout the different phases of the project, directors who were first associated with the project and then weren't, actors who were supposed to play Freddie Mercury but then didn't. There's a lot of information out there if you'd like to Google it. But the most popular disagreement probably happened with the actor Sacha Baron Cohen. He was announced as Freddie for a while, but then he either left the project on his own terms or he was asked to leave. I don't know, and quite frankly, I don't really care. I'm just glad that it didn't work out with him. And that's for two reasons, really. One, after seeing the film, I thought Rami Malek did a great job, and now I can't picture anybody else in that role. But number two, I thought Cohen's vision for this film was wrong. I think his head was in the wrong place, because his idea was to focus on Freddie's so-called dark side, whatever that means. And I thought that a film like that would have been a huge disservice, because at the end of the day, a film with that kind of vision, with Cohen's vision, would have reduced Freddie to one thing and one thing only, and that's not fair at all. Now, the version we ended up with does touch upon certain aspects of Freddie's life that Cohen was probably talking about. But to do it any more than they did would have been fairly insulting, and like I said, would have been a disservice. I think that the people who seem to be obsessed with, you know, certain parties or certain drug users or whatever, I think those people probably never read beyond what the tabloids have written, and that's just disappointing, really, because I wish that they would actually bother to get to know the man rather than focus on one thing and one thing only. Like I said, that's not fair at all. So I think Cohen's a good actor in general, but I'm just really, really glad that things did not work out with him, because I think his vision was completely wrong. When I first heard of this movie idea, I'll be honest, I was a little nervous for reasons I stated earlier. At the end of the day, you know, we all knew this wasn't going to be a documentary, right? We all knew that this was a commercial film. And because it's a commercial film, they were going to try and draw as big of an audience as possible. And that's fine, like commercial films, that's what they do, and there's no shame in that, that's fine, but with that goal, with that aim, comes the question of, okay, so if they want to draw as big of an audience as possible, what does that mean in terms of the changes they're going to make to Freddie's story? Because like I said, that story matters to me, his legacy matters to me, and it matters to millions of other people. I'm obviously not the only one. But the question with a commercial film becomes, okay, so what things are they going to keep and what things are they going to change? Now, some of this anxiety was unwarranted when I saw the film, I realized, but some of it wasn't. And I will talk about that in detail later. So, at the end of the day, the two living members of Queen who are also active, Brian May and Roger Taylor, because of course John Deacon retired from music business in the late 90s, but Brian and Roger were determined to make this film, and so the project began. So as Freddie says at the beginning of Another One Bites the Dust, let's go! Before I get to my detailed review, I will give you my overall thoughts on the film. I overall liked it. I thought it was a good film. But my review isn't going to be straightforward because I do have mixed feelings about certain scenes. You know, there were parts about this film I loved and there were parts that I didn't like so much. Now, because I'm a huge fan and because I'm fairly knowledgeable about the band's story, I could speak about Queen for hours and hours, but in order to keep this review as concise as possible, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna group the most common comments I've seen about this film, and then I'm gonna give you my reaction to those particular comments. That way, it'll be a lot easier for you to follow my train of thought. So here we go. Before you guys continue, here's a disclaimer. There are going to be spoilers throughout the rest of this video, so if you haven't seen the film and if you'd like to see it at some point, just keep in mind that there are going to be spoilers, so if you don't... I'm sure you guys know by this point that the film ends at Live Aid in 1985, and this quickly became a topic of debate, and apparently some people didn't like that, and they thought that the film should have delved into the later years of Freddie and show us his battle with AIDS. See, I disagree with that criticism. I think the filmmakers absolutely had the right idea by ending the film on a high note. The thing is, Freddie, as noted in the film, refused to be remembered as a victim. And knowing him from everything I've read so far, I think he would have absolutely hated to be pitied by thousands of moviegoers. I think ending the film on a high note the way they did, they sort of allowed the audience to celebrate his life rather than feel sad or sorry for him. Besides, if you'd like to read about his later years or watch documentaries about that, there's plenty of material out there. Like, for example, I mentioned Peter Freestone's book. Peter Freestone's book is a great book that goes into detail about a lot of different aspects of Freddie's life, but he talks about some of these things that some people said they wish the film had covered. So there's already a lot of talk about that, but not much has been said about how the band was formed, what some of the internal band struggles were, what some of the personal struggles Freddie went through, so on and so forth. Obviously, big fans already knew a lot of that, but again, we're talking about a commercial film. So I think that the film had the right idea by trying to cover multiple aspects of his life and not really going through something that already has been covered a lot. And again, if they had gone into that territory, it wouldn't have allowed us to end the film on such a high note and to truly celebrate his life. I think Live Aid was a great idea because even though the band technically did not break up, they never really broke up. So that's something that that's an area where the film deviates from real life. But it is true that Live Aid allowed each member of the band to embrace Queen, to embrace their collective identity as Queen a lot more than they had in a long time. So in a sense, Live Aid basically revitalized all of their interest in the band. What happened right after Live Aid was this band collaboration called One Vision, which was first released as a single and then as the opening track to A Kind of Magic. And if you look at the studio footage on YouTube, you can see just how much fun they were having, and Live Aid played a crucial role there. Live Aid was the point. As much as we enjoy the performance, and it is an amazing performance, it meant a lot more than that to the members of Queen. So in that sense, I think it was great that they chose that to end the film with. I think the 86 European tour would have worked also, but I understand why they chose Live Aid, and I completely agree with their decision. I think it was just perfect. I thought the cast was just excellent. Honestly, I can't think of a single person in the cast who would potentially be the weak link or whatever. Like, I thought that all of them did a fantastic job. I thought Rami was great, and Gwilym Lee as Brian May. Wow, like, the guy looks and sounds like Brian May. If you were to close your eyes, you would think that it was Brian May himself speaking on the movie screen. So I thought that they were all great. Look, say what you will about certain scenes and how the script was written, and again, I wasn't happy with every single scene, but say what you will about that. One thing for sure is the cast was absolutely magnificent. I think they were all great, and one thing I appreciated about them even more after seeing the film, also to do this review, I went on YouTube and watched a lot of interviews with the cast members, especially with the four guys that played members of Queen. And one thing I appreciate is I can tell that they genuinely appreciate this opportunity and they genuinely care about the legacy of the band. Rami Malek in particular, he said in some interviews that after studying Freddie for more than a year to prepare for this role, he said that after all that preparation, he now loved Freddie and felt a personal connection to him. And like I said, as a fan, you appreciate hearing those things because I know he's being genuine. So in that sense, I thought that not only did the cast do a great job, but it is very clear to me that they're incredibly appreciative of this opportunity, and it's very clear to me that they care about the legacy of the band, and I think that that's just remarkable. That's great. This came up a lot when I was reading other people's comments. Let me just say that I strongly disagree with this criticism. There's lots to say on this topic, but I will try and keep it short. First of all, the film did not ignore anything about Freddie's identity struggles, whether it was his sexual identity or about being a Parsi Indian living in England. Like, it was all there. So if people are criticizing the film because it didn't cover these aspects of Freddie's life, that's just not true, because, you know, the film did cover those parts of his life. So I've seen some people say that these issues were not touched upon, and I'm not entirely certain what movie they watched, because they were all certainly there. But then there's some people who say they wanted more of certain aspects of his life. See, I have a hard time understanding just how much focus these people wanted on some parties in the early 80s, or Freddie's drug use, or whatever else they were looking for. You know, should it have been the entire film? Should it have been half of the film? What exactly were they looking for? It's just so outrageous to me that all these people care about is Freddie's private life. Seriously? I mean, look, of course the film had a responsibility to touch upon certain aspects of his life and to touch upon certain issues. Nobody's denying that, but they did do that. And if people wanted more of those aspects of his life, if people wanted even those aspects of his life exaggerated for their own dramatic pleasure, then I don't think that they truly understand who Freddie was. I think that that kind of film would have been incredibly disrespectful towards a person who was so much more than what these people are making him out to be. You know, Freddie was a gentle person with a clever sense of humor, a loyal friend, and a major creative force in Queen. So, no, his story was not sanitized in this film. I just think that this is a ridiculous criticism, and I'm gonna end this section of the video with a footage from an interview Gwilym Lee did a while back.
Freddie never wanted to be defined. Well, you know, I'm not speaking on Freddie's behalf. I don't want to speak on Freddie's behalf, but just we felt that he never wanted to be a poster boy for one specific thing. He didn't want to be known for being a gay man, or just an AIDS victim, or just you know, an immigrant. You know, that's just as much a part of his story. And you know, I think it would be too simplified to just make it focus on one thing. He's a complicated man, and like, his whole story is trying to struggle with that complicated identity, and that's what's interesting. It's not straightforward. It's this rich and complex life that you know, that he struggled with throughout his life is what we kind of wanted to portray.
No, of course not, but believe it or not, this popped up in more reviews than one. And at first, you know, I was taken aback by the word punish. Some people use the word resentment, because those are too strong, and no, I don't think at all that Brian and Roger would ever try to punish their friend and bandmate. But after a while, I started understanding a little bit where this criticism may come from. It's a complicated answer, but this did come up, so I do want to address it. The fact of the matter is, Brian and Roger were involved with the film. We all know that. In a sense, I'm glad that they were, because I think that this movie was going to get made with or without them. And, you know, I'd rather have someone who actually knew Freddie be there. But again, the fact is, Brian and Roger were involved with this film, and they got portrayed in the film. Whereas Freddie wasn't there to say, wait a minute, what about this? You know, so those are just the facts. So when you see the film and when you look at the portrayals of the band members, and you know, Brian and Roger are these open-minded saviors of the band, and Freddie is this party guy who shows up to rehearsals late and sometimes drunk, and he even leaves the band. It annoys some fans naturally, because it's kind of like, well, you guys were involved with making this film and your portrayal is just like, it's pristine, it's super squeaky clean, and then you pinned everything on Freddie. Even though I don't agree with these people's conclusion, I understand where the criticism comes from, because fact of the matter is, Freddie wasn't the only member of Queen who engaged in excessive behavior at times, right? But if you look at the film, you wouldn't necessarily get that. And I know at the end of the day, this film had a separate screenwriter, and I think screenwriters, I think it's plural. But, you know, you wouldn't be fooling anyone if you think Brian and Roger didn't have the final say. So at the end of the day, from a fan's point of view, you look at the film and you're like, well, you were involved with the film and you do no wrong in the film. You're always open-minded, always saying yes, never engaging in any kind of behavior that could be construed as excessive or whatever. And then all the problems the band faced seem to come from Freddie. That is a little one-sided, and that one-sidedness led people to suggest that Brian and Roger may have some resentment issues that they haven't gotten over, or maybe they were trying to punish Freddie. My view is pretty clear. There were quite a lot of scenes that I did not like, that did not sit well with me, and I will name some of those scenes later. So I'm not really defending the decisions behind those scenes, but it's one thing to disagree with how certain people were portrayed in certain things. It's another thing to suggest that these two wanted to punish anybody. At the end of the day, let's not let some scenes we didn't like make us say nasty things about two people who've been working really hard to keep the band's legacy alive. Like I said, I might have my disagreements with the creative directions Brian and Roger might take, or may have taken over the years, but let's all remember that those two were the ones that respected Freddie's wish to keep his AIDS diagnosis a secret. They even lied to the press to protect their friend's privacy. They were the ones that composed with Freddie right until the very end, oftentimes changing their schedule every time Freddie needed it so they could go into the studio with him and write as much as possible. And that's one of the things that kept Freddie going until he no longer could. After he died, Brian and Roger appeared on numerous TV shows to set the record straight and correct a lying press. They organized a massive tribute concert. They've been doing a lot of official live releases and documentaries to keep the legacy alive. They did the beautiful Made in Heaven album, and you know, and it's not even just the two of them. You know, there's Freddie's sister, Kashmira, who emailed Rami to say nice things about him and about the film. And there's photos of her on IMDb attending a Bohemian Rhapsody related event. There's Peter Freestone, somebody I mentioned earlier in the video, who helped the filmmakers, and he answered questions about Freddie for a more accurate portrayal. So all of these people were involved in the film that care about Freddie, and I don't think that any one of them would ever think about punishing anybody. So I just think that, like I said, part of me understands where this criticism may come from, but again, let's not allow certain creative disagreements make us say nasty things about Brian and Roger. I think suggesting that they might have resentment issues or they might want to punish Freddie, that's just ridiculous, and that's completely wrong. Now this is a big one. This is the area where, I keep hearing the phrase artistic liberty, and then there's there's all these people that say, but this wasn't a documentary or whatever. And look, before I get to my particular comment, saying that this isn't a documentary isn't that helpful, because we're all aware that this isn't a documentary, right? Like, nobody really expected a documentary type of thing. But so I understood from the beginning that there were going to be certain things that were going to be changed. Like, that part in itself was not a surprise to anybody, including myself. But at the same time, this film also was not advertised as loosely based on Queen or inspired by Queen. You know, there are certain phrases that Hollywood likes to use when they're trying to tell you that this is just inspired by a particular thing or loosely based on a particular thing. This film was rather advertised as Queen's story. So while of course no one should have expected a documentary, I think we all had the right to expect a certain level of accuracy, which, hey, some people were happy about it. I wasn't entirely. I liked some of the changes they made, but others not so much. But before I began, I just wanted to address, because the biggest reaction I get is people saying, but this wasn't a documentary, and I'm just letting you know that yes, like, I'm aware it wasn't, but it also was not advertised as loosely based on Queen. So I think as a fan, I had a right to expect a certain standard of accuracy. First of all, in general, I don't have a problem with artistic liberties. You know what I mean? Like I said, when the film was first announced, I knew that was going to have to happen. That was bound to happen. How else are you gonna cram more than a decade into 2 hours? There's no other way. So I understood and even liked some of the changes they made, but I think that in general, an artistic liberty should be the last resort. Like, if there's nothing else that you can possibly do, that's when you should take those liberties. So there are a few questions that you can ask yourself if you're trying to make the decision. You know, is there anybody we can consult about this? Anyone who was actually there? Is this absolutely necessary to the overall flow of the film? Is this absolutely necessary to understand certain concepts in the film, to get a better context? Do we absolutely need to make this change to fit a certain time frame inside the film? So there are some questions that you can ask yourself to figure out whether you want to take the liberty or not. And depending on the situation, you're going to have to make them. I completely get it. I actually think that in certain cases the film did do a good job. I can actually think of two good examples from the film. One is when Freddie comes out to Mary as bisexual. As Lucy Boynton, the actress who played Mary Austin, said, nobody was in the room when that happened except for Freddie and Mary. Mary wasn't involved with the film, so at the end of the day, that is a crucial scene to understand some of Freddie's identity struggles, so it's not something that they would have been able to skip. So they had to create a plausible dialogue between Freddie and Mary based on what they knew. I understood then, and I thought that that scene was executed rather well. Another example is how Freddie meets Brian and Roger for the first time. Obviously, Queen fans know that's not how that happened, because Freddie knew Brian and Roger prior to joining them in Smile and later Queen, because Freddie knew Tim Staffel. Tim was his classmate at Ealing Art College. But when you need to cram, more than a decade into 2 hours, you're gonna have to make some changes. Hey, as a Queen fan, I would have gladly watched a 10-hour film. That's no problem at all. But that wasn't going to be the case for a lot of people, so I understand why they wanted to cut that scene short. That had to happen in the film. Freddie has to meet Brian and Roger at some point in the film for the story to go on, but it also had to be short and sweet. So those two cases, just to give you an example, like, a lot of artistic liberties were taken on both occasions, but ultimately I think those were needed for the flow of the film. and there wasn't, there were some people they could consult to get some accuracy here and there, but at the end of the day, for time purposes, they also needed to be cut short a little bit. So I can understand why those decisions were made, and I think those two scenes were executed rather well. That said, not every artistic liberty was needed. In fact, some of them actually painted a horribly inaccurate picture of Freddie. Look, I'll say it again, I overall liked the film, but with certain different choices, this film would have been great instead of just good. I just wish that they had chosen to do certain scenes differently. I will never understand why they wanted to pin certain things entirely on Freddie, but here we are. So I just want to go through some of these inaccuracies to set the record straight. What bothered me most was this idea that Freddie was the only member of the band that engaged in excessive behavior. This simply isn't true. To mention Freddie's activities during a certain era and to ignore everybody else's paints a biased picture. We all know that May and Taylor had their fair share of struggles because of the rockstar lifestyle. Maybe not to the extent that Freddie did, but to not say anything about their behavior hurts the credibility of the film. Look, I've got nothing against May and Taylor, this isn't about their behavior either. But all I'm saying is, why paint this biased picture when you know you engaged in some of that too? It just negates the role fame and fortune played in all of their lives. Furthermore, Freddie wasn't the only person in Queen to release a solo album. By the time his solo record came out in 1985, the drummer Roger Taylor had already released 2. So portraying Freddie as somebody who was seduced by money is just inaccurate and in my opinion unfair. The thing is, all members of Queen at the time had strong creative differences exacerbated by their egos. But to paint a picture of Freddie as the only person in Queen to ever want to release a solo album or to do a solo album is just unfair. At the end of the day, through various Queen documentaries, we know that the advance that Freddie received to do his solo album was higher than what Queen had received for their studio album at the time. So it is possible that may have created some tension in the band, but saying nothing about Roger's solo albums and saying nothing about Brian's Starfleet project just felt disingenuous to me, and I thought that it was just unfair to portray Freddie as somebody who was seduced by money and as somebody who would leave the band to pursue his solo career when reality is far from that. There's also this idea that Queen broke up because of Freddie, because Freddie left the band. I mean, you could not explain this by artistic liberties or whatever. I will never understand why they felt the need to portray Freddie as somebody who leaves the band and why they felt the need to, create this storyline where Queen actually breaks up. Look, I understand that because this was a commercial film, they wanted to build tension throughout the film, because the higher the tension, the more important, the more crucial that Live Aid scene becomes, right? So I get that, but if that's what they wanted, if they wanted the tension to be high for dramatic effect or whatever, there were so many other ways to go about it. Hell, the truth itself would have sufficed. Live Aid was a crucial moment in the band's history, so I don't think that there was any need to create this storyline where the band breaks up because of Freddie. I just, that's not something that I really liked in the film. Here's the thing. At this point, we all know that at certain periods there were, struggles within the band. There was a lot of creative differences. The members didn't see eye to eye on where to go next. And we talked about some of that during this video too, so that we know. But the thing is, Brian May himself was quoted as recently as last year as saying that they all left the band at some point, meaning things got so heated at certain moments in the band that they all felt incredibly frustrated. So can we interpret this as maybe Freddie at some point said certain words that can be construed as leaving? Okay, yeah, that's possible, but according to Brian May himself, they all did this. They all did this. And I don't think that he means quite literally, because otherwise the band would have broken up, but we know that it didn't. Technically, the band never broke up. So certain members may have said certain words, again, that could be construed as leaving. But if all of them did this, and that's according to Brian May, by the way, if all of them did this, why are we pinning it entirely on Freddie in the film? I don't think that, again, that's fair, because, like, it's just... And saying that, again, like, saying artistic liberty doesn't really apply here. You're not saying this film is loosely based on Queen. You're saying this is their story. This is Freddie's story, but saying that he left the band for his solo career, he left the band because he felt frustrated, while not saying anything about the behavior of others, that's a little one-sided, and that's a little biased. And this was another case of a scene where I did not really enjoy the so-called liberty that they took. You know, I wish that they had chosen a different route. And then there was that scene where Freddie begs to come back. That was just excruciating to watch. But if you're watching this, just know that that never happened. Queen did not break up. Freddie did not leave the band. Again, we know that there was a lot of tension in the band. Who knows what words were said in these private meetings. But once again, Freddie did not leave Queen. He was always a member. A lot of people also mentioned this, but there's also that scene with manager John Reid in the car where Freddie fires him. Again, this is highly inaccurate. First of all, John Reid was not working with the band in the 80s. His engagement with Queen ended in 1978. So around the time Freddie's solo album became a topic, John Reid was nowhere near. And second of all, Freddie never had the authority to fire a band manager by himself. It's not the kind of decision that he could make on his own. And third, you know, when they did work together, when Queen and John Reid did work together, Freddie and Reid had a fairly good relationship. John Reid himself talks about that in various Queen documentaries. So, you know, all in all, again, I don't really understand why they felt the need to portray Freddie as someone who would just fire a band manager as they're, driving in the car. But here we are. There's a few more, but I'll leave it at that. Look, I think that some artistic liberties were wisely chosen, but others, such as some examples I gave in this video, just did not sit well with me. I think that there were other ways they could have gone about them, and I don't think that I'll ever understand why they felt the need to go in the certain direction that they did. Even in that scene where John Deacon comes up with the "Another One Bites the Dust" riff, even in that scene, you see all members of the band getting excited when D-Key comes up with that riff, when in reality we know that Brian May and Roger Taylor did not like that song when it was first written. It was Freddie who believed in Deacon's song. But even on that minute detail, like I accept, I'll admit, it's like a small thing, and you know, I'm not really making a big deal out of this particular scene, but even on this small detail, Brian May and Roger Taylor just could not be shown as people saying no, like even on this. So this is why a lot of people felt that at times the film was a little too one-sided when they portrayed two people as like these open-minded saviors, and Freddie being the guy that often said no to certain things. So, you know, I love Brian May and Roger Taylor. Like I said, like they're two legendary musicians to me. But I do genuinely think that perhaps they shouldn't get too defensive when people say that some scenes feel one-sided. So in conclusion, I'll say this. Even though I have some disagreements about certain scenes, I overall enjoyed the film. I overall liked the film. The reason why is because I thought that they had the right idea by focusing on Freddie as a complex human being, a brilliant musician, and covering multiple aspects of his life rather than just one. I liked the cast a lot. I thought that Rami Malek did a great job, and the interviews they've been doing clearly shows that they genuinely care about Queen's legacy, and I truly appreciate that as a fan. I think the script was great at times too, and I really love the fact that they ended the film on a high note. That's the way to celebrate somebody's life, for sure. I think ultimately certain things should not have been pinned entirely on Freddie, and that will always leave me with mixed feelings when it comes to this film. But the way that I see it, as much as I have mixed feelings, if this film inspired people who were not fans of Queen before to do some research on the band and to buy an album or two and to start getting to know the band, then it has certainly done its job. Rest in peace, Freddie. You've always been a legend to me. And there you have it. I want to thank you all for watching this episode of Megadepth. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss out on new content. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for written articles, including a written review for the film. Go to megadepth.com. Thanks again, and I will see you soon.